Okay, today I want to talk about a artistic concept that I absolutely adore. Um, it's a concept that I've started thinking a bit more in my works recently, but I've realized sort of applies to everything I've been doing so far. Um, and this concept is that every single work that I do, every single piece of music, piece of art that I create carries a bit of the previous work as well as a bit of the next work. So it's a bit philosophical, isn't it? But that sort of reflects on the perception of, first of all, the perception of the work of an artist in the sense of uh, the the integrity, the entire career, for lack of better words. In French, we would call this l'oeuvre. And really, it's the entire lifetime creative process of the artist. So, this, with that concept, that smaller concept of the piece carrying a bit of the previous one and a bit of the next one, entails that, first of all, the artist looks at his oeuvre as being one big piece. What do I mean by that? Rather than looking at every single work as being independent, it's more seeing the entire process, the entire journey as being one long work, one oeuvre, um, with its evolution, with its changes, but however, with all its pieces being interconnected. Um, I don't have a very long oeuvre yet. It's roughly 10 years, but it's true that I see connections between my earliest works and what I do today. But I also see an evolution in it. And I see how some thoughts that I had 10 years ago um, still relate to how I think today and also how they've changed. I'm noticing that I have a guest today. There's a fly that's been stuck in this flat for the entire day. That's my fault. I kept the doors and the windows open all day because of that great weather, and now this guest has invited itself. So it's trying to make itself a place in the podcast. Fair enough. So what was I trying to say? Essentially, 10 years, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of an artistic career is a long journey, is one big work. And when the artist looks at what has been created, what is being created, and what will be created, there's a guiding line between all these works. And I think it's really interesting that forces the artist, however, in order to see that structure, to see that continuity, that forces the artist to do something that a lot of artists are guilty of not doing, which is to look back at the works. And it's true that we tend to work on projects, work on new pieces, and as soon as they're done, we move to the next one and we sort of forget about them. So in order to understand this trajectory, the artist has to force himself to sort of look back at what's been done. And when it comes to a composer, it's essentially listening back to the works that have been created in order to understand them differently. And it's true that when you take a bit of distance from your works, you perceive them a bit less as the creator, a bit less as the owner, and you understand them a bit more as the audience, the listener. And this is because you tend to forget what thoughts had been going through your mind in the creative process, and you sort of enjoy the piece for what it is. So it's interesting, I think, to look at one's career as one big project with lots of little things in the middle. And I tend to think that my first work where I really felt, okay, I'm getting somewhere, or at least I'm expressing myself the way I want to, is my work called Angles. It's a 3-part work for solo piano, and it's essentially a work where I look at the same musical material from different angles. What's funny is that this idea of looking at things from a different point of view in music, it's often translated as what we call theme and variations, for instance. It's something that I do and that I approach still to this day in a very different way, I think. But the variations aspect of music has always been through my creative process, and in fact, there's a lot of the music that I've written that goes through this. So it's interesting to see that it's not because there's a project that's been done that the ideas behind it are dead. So that brings us to the main topic of this podcast, which is that idea of a piece carrying a bit of the previous and a bit of the next one. So I'll give you a bit of some context into how I, for instance, approach music and composing music. Very often it's intellectual. There's always an idea. There's always a process that I'm trying to look at. I always take inspiration from non-musical material, and often there's a process of translation. There's a process of trying to bring an idea that I've seen somewhere and translate it in music. So that's very sort of unmusical in a way, and it's true that a lot of my creative process is non-musical. In fact, I often say I spend more time thinking about music than I spend time actually doing music. And it's like there's a lot of thought process in my creative process, and the practical moment, which is the creation itself, is very short. But it's not feasible without that moment, that period of pre-thoughts. So anyway, in that thought process, I'm sort of gathering the sort of substance, the intellectual substance of the project, and I'm trying to translate this into music. And what I've often realized is that what will tend to come up is what I've been studying, what I've been listening to, what I've been influenced by, and this will sort of come out naturally as this is going to be the musical medium for that piece, for that work. So let's say if I'm studying the sonatas of Mozart, I might have a pattern under my fingers or in my head that I'll use as a first musical idea to exploit that sort of artistic concept I have. And what's funny is that often I tend to write music very quickly, and I tend to write a lot of music. And so within that moment of time, there's a lot of different works that I'm going to approach. There's works that are going to be based on very different intellectual subjects, but they're all going to be around that influence that I have at the moment. So I'll give you an example. I've just written a piece that's going to come out in a couple of weeks. Written, recorded, it's all ready, and it's been inspired by Sisask. It's an Estonian composer who's written music, pentatonic music inspired by the stars, essentially. I think it's called Starry Sky Cycle, something like this. Wonderful music, really, really, really wonderful miniatures, precious little pieces of music. It's absolutely divine. And so I've been listening. I've discovered his music a very long time ago, almost the same time I discovered Arvo Pärt's music, and I really, really liked it, and it's stuck in my head for a long time. And recently, I've started studying the construction of his pieces a bit more, because I'm currently trying to rethink how the pentatonic scale works, because I don't like the idea that the only usage that we make on our side of the world of the pentatonic scale is the one of blues music, when it's such a rich scale that is probably the most played scale in the world, in its, at least in its structure of 5 notes. But we tend to associate it, particularly if you've played the guitar or the piano, we tend to make it sound very bluesy from the beginning, when there's limitless possibilities with that scale. So he's created his own scales based on 5 notes, so pentatonic scales, but it sounds very, very, very particular. It's very unique in a way. So I really liked that approach, and I've also really liked the way he was approaching piano playing. So anyway, I was studying a little bit of this, and this has been in a lot of the works that I've done recently. And those elements have been carried over into what I'm doing today, and that piece I've just done today. So that first part of the sentence sort of validated itself, because I've realized actually that's true. I tend to sort of tame the muse, the creative muse, well enough so that I keep a little drop of inspiration for the next piece. What's also interesting is to see that often concepts that you're exploring in the pieces are sort of unsatisfied. You try to, you look at a concept, you look at something you want to do technically or harmonically or rhythmically, but obviously the concepts most of the times are so rich and so dense that you can really just extract a few of these ideas and shape them in your piece. So obviously what happens is that you tend to take some of these ideas and carry them over because, well, you're not really satisfied with having exploited only one idea of that concept. So you bring it back in another piece. And I think, for instance, something I've realized in a lot of the music that I've been creating over the past 2-3 years is that there is an element of me trying to understand how to navigate with silence better, how to understand better how to create space in my music in an intentional way. And so a lot of the pieces that I've written in the past years, some pieces on top of my mind from Piano Day, some pieces for various projects have this element of trying to understand better how to navigate through space and how to, as Miles Davis would say, hear the music that's between the notes. And so that's a concept that is being carried over in my future pieces because I'm still not satisfied with it. And I still want to keep exploring it. And God knows how long it's going to take me until I've sort of had enough of this concept. But yes, that's sort of the second part of that sentence. You know, that's understanding that when you're creating music, you're essentially in the middle, you know, in the present, but you're carrying a bit of yourself from before, and you're sort of shaping what your future self will be. And anyway, that's really a concept that sort of stuck in my head, and I thought it was really interesting to look at your career, regardless of how long it is, this way, trying to understand how it's one big line and all those little dots in the middle are connected to each other. And I think I'll finish with another interesting fact that I've had from a book I'm reading at the moment on innovators. It's a book written by this writer that I forgot the name, but who's quite well known for having written the biography of Steve Jobs and Abraham Lincoln, and he's very, very well known. And he's written that book on people that have innovated, and his book is very centered on essentially creation of the computer and internet, and so it's more of a technological look at innovation. However, he mentions something at the beginning of that book, which is that innovation happens in two sort of waves. The first one is lots of small steps and one big leap, one or two or as much as needed. And same thing, it's a little bit interesting to look at this because you can think, and I'll bring this back in music, for instance, if you look at the work of Stravinsky, Stravinsky is well known for having had sort of three lives, right? Three musical lives. And within those 3 lives you have. So those 3 lives could be considered as the big leaps that he's done in his career, and then you have in the middle of those leaps the small steps that he's taken into progressing, into going from A to B, B to C, C to D. So all those little gaps that he's had in the middle that moved him forward. And I like to think as well that, you know, the role of the artist is to keep pushing the envelope of music, to keep pushing the frontiers, and to try to explore universes and sounds, and so it's in a way it's perceiving, you know, artists as innovators, as people that are constantly creating new and constantly pushing sort of human progresses. So yeah, that's really what I wanted to talk about. I think I could have had a bit of a shorter talk, but I got a bit carried away with this idea that I really, really like. I don't know what you think about it. For the artists that are watching this video, that are listening to that podcast, I wonder if you perceive your work the same way. I wonder if you have this understanding of your work in this sort of grand scale, and then smaller sort of patterns. Anyway, that's my podcast on art. It's available. It's now available on YouTube, actually. I've just managed to put it on YouTube. So it's now on Spotify, it's on YouTube, and it's on my Instagram page. These are the 3 places where I share this. On Art is a podcast where I talk about art, mostly through the eyes of the musician, but not only. I talk about musical concepts like I did today, philosophical concepts, actually. I also talk a bit about some of my works. I explain some of the ways I create. In the future, I hope to have guests as well, guest musicians and guest artists. So that's probably going to come up later this year. But anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching again. It's been a bit longer than I thought it'd be, but I hope you've enjoyed, and I hope this video has inspired you to create or to discover more art. Thanks for watching.